Hello, my name is Rob Simpson and welcome to Directors Uncut. If this is your first episode, we put filmmakers from all genres and all corners of the globe onto a huge list that covers everything from Japanese cult directors who didn't quite get the international break to escapees from French extremism and everything in between too. Then we turn it into a lottery of directors by using a random number generator, and whatever name comes out of the hat, myself and a guest host discuss them and their work through 2 films. Given that this one is one from the Patreon archive, I'm re-recording this intro and there'll be some selective editing throughout to modernise it as well, because it was originally recorded in January 2021. Nonetheless, I have been joined this week by Graham Williamson from the Pop Screen Podcast and Horrified magazine. We picked out Robert Hamer, who he's a director who's pretty much from the Ealing stock, and we'll go on to talk about both Hearts and Coronets and It Only Rains on a Sunday.
So, should we start out with It Always Rains on Sunday? Because that's the one that was completely new to me.
Yes, I mean, before we get into that, the only other one of Hamer's movies I've seen is Pink String and Sealing Wax, which has an awful lot in common with It Only Rains on a Sunday.
In terms of my prior experience, I had seen Hearts and Coronets before, and I had also seen Dead of Night, in which he provides a sequence, but not that sequence, so people always forget he did one. But, I mean, I think Dead of Night is pretty solidly good, but the one everyone remembers is the ventriloquist dummy, right?
Yeah, that's the famous one. There's also a 2009 remake. I don't think he was involved in that, but...
What a comeback if he was, though.
Oh, it's you.
Don't go out. He's asleep downstairs. How are you feeling?
Better? Fine.
Well, you don't look too fine even now. When I think of what you used to look like. With your smart suits and your fancy ties and your manicures. What have you got out of it, except those scars on your back?
I was dead unlucky. First time I was shocked. I had me taped off then. Then I made a mistake and tried a different kind of job. I stuck to smash and grab, but I've been all right.
Maybe. Don't do that.
I've been away a long time, Rose.
You mustn't do it.
Oh, you used to love me.
You bleeding fool. Why do you think I'm doing all this for you? Because I used to love you?
Do you still then?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know anything today.
This is a 1947 film, pretty much proto-kitchen sink. That's around on a lot of separate narratives, but the main one is around Googie Withers, who's just fantastic, who is a housewife to a man who's 15 years older than him, 15 years older than her, I should say, and there's news breaking that a man has escaped from prison, a man who happens to be her former fiancé from 15 years past. And what starts is, Googie hides the escaped convict, and all sorts of things within the family unit are tested and pulled and prodded within that.
Yeah, some of the casting is so interesting in this, because like you say, Googie Withers is fantastic in it. Her husband, I think if you wanted to give the impression that her husband was like this older, out-of-touch, unexciting stick in the mud, you could not do better than cast the guy who played Mr. Grimsdale in all those old Norman Wisdom comedies. So they did.
Well, I never knew that, I'll be honest.
There's some good typecasting in it. The detective who goes after Googie's ex-fiancée is played by the same guy who played Dixon of Dock Green.
Well, I should have noticed that. I watched I think it's called The Blue Lamp, the movie which inspired the Dixon of Dock Green, and he's in that, so I was not paying attention.
I think, yeah... There is this sense where a lot of British male actors of the 1940s kind of blur into one huge posh guy for me. It's like, were they a gestalt? I don't know.
We're dropping a hint for the next movie there, but before, let's not get onto that.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, it's genuinely, I'd say for me, this is sort of like golden era of British cinema, though, this sort of cast, sort of 1940s to 1960s. We were making some of the finest movies in the world, and we had just great casts through and through. But for me, talking about It Only Rains on a Sunday, I always have to come back to this aspect that it's a proto kitchen sink drama. And there's a certain amount of baggage with that. I think the first one I saw was A Taste of Honey. And that was a bad first impression for me because I hated it. It's just grimness through and through. But sort of counter to that, this doesn't feel like a kitchen sink drama in the way that it's just a load of misery. It sort of establishes this style, but doesn't really... It sort of evades a lot of the things that would later become cliches and stereotypes.
Oh, yeah, and I can give you an illustrated lecture about cliches and stereotypes in British social realist films because for some reason that I don't yet fully understand, I spent basically all of Christmas and New Year watching British kitchen sink dramas. I guess I thought 2020 can't get more depressing, so I might as well do this.
That's a horrible way to finish a year, Graham.
But I did that, and so maybe it's just that I had been watching some absolutely rankly cliched British misery dramas alongside it, but this did not strike me as that kitchen sinky. I can see how it is a step on the way, but it's also got strong thriller elements. The finale reminded me of nothing so much as The Third Man, more than anything.
It also has like a kind of a real neat zest for life as well. The stepdaughters of Googies have a real vim and vigour about them. There's a sequence in what I'm going to say, he owns Arcade, I can't remember the name of the character, who he caught the younger of the two daughters to work for him. And that sequence, in another film, in another kitchen sink drama, it would have a harsh, horrible, inescapable doom about it.
Yeah.
But in that, it has this sort of charming seaside postcard mentality to it. I know it doesn't make sense internationally, but English, yeah.
Well, I think that there is, the simplest way you can put it is that there is a sense of escape. And I guess maybe next month on Pop Screen, we're covering That'll Be the Day, the David Essex film. And that also has a fairground scene. And there is just no sense of release in it at all. It's like, oh wow, I've discovered the fairground and rock and roll. They're going to make my life slightly less miserable than it is, I guess. And I wonder whether that's a generational thing. Like, by the time you're making rock and roll films, the young people like something that the old people don't get, and there's that element of judgment in it. Whereas now, in 1947, in It Always Rains on Sunday, the director just relates to that as, well, they're kids, they're going to the seaside, of course that's fun. You know, there isn't the schism that would appear later.
And there was also another aspect, he's kind of expressed the husband, Googie's husband, I really should remember the name of characters, but I'm
George Sandergate. George Sandergate it was, yeah.
Yeah, but he's depicted as sort of harming white meat, that doesn't make any sense. Charming white meat. And he's sort of very nice and lovely. He wouldn't say boo to a ghost. But I don't know whether it's a thing that travels internationally, but very old England values are all there in him. Where the woman stays at home and does all the housework, which makes me think this is sort of expressed as being that nice man at home, the nice husband that everybody wants, despite the fact that he wants me to stay home and cook food all day.
Yeah.
You know, it's a little bit jarring with modern sensibilities, but there's little slivers throughout there which make you think, actually, no, he's not that bad, where he says something along the lines of, do you want me to bring a bottle of Guinness home for you? And she says, oh yeah, that'll be lovely. It's little touches like that. It sort of knock back that whole old, horrible stereotype of the... Well, you know the stereotype anyway. I'm not over-explaining it.
No, I know what you mean, and I think that's one of the things that the Ealing directors were always very good at. When you look at something like Alexander McKendrick's The Lady Killers, that's an almost miraculous balance, because he has to present the gang in it as being intimidating enough to keep the tension going, but also not so intimidating that they stop being funny. And that's really difficult. Yeah. And I think here you've got something subtler but still as difficult happening with Edward Chapman's character George, that he is a husband who is bad enough that you can understand why his wife is tempted to have an affair, but not so bad that you lose sympathy for him.
Yeah, I mean, when it all comes out at the end, he's genuinely a nice guy about it.
Yeah.
Which I think... It's the old, kitchen sink stereotypes which make you believe that, no, her life's misery. She's going to be divorced. All the kids will go. She'll have a horrible his miserable life as a spinster with cats.
I think you've seen Pieces of a Woman on Netflix as well, then.
No, I haven't. But I'm not going to be now, then, if that's what that is.
I've only seen bits of it, but it is basically like... If you sold it to me as a science fiction drama set in a parallel universe where people can only communicate by yelling and throwing things at each other, the film would not be altered one bit.
Oh no. Yeah, I'll avoid that then. That sounds like miserable time. But yeah, I mean, it's one of these challenging films, I think, It Only Rains on Sunday, because it is sold as a noir.
Yeah.
It often pops up on these lists of great British noirs, which I don't think it really is, but it is at the same time. It just sort of compacts it all in through little hints of story. There's a running thing throughout it, which I don't think is really paid off, about roller skates.
Yeah.
It goes nowhere.
That's quite weird, that, because I had never thought before this, I had never spent any time thinking, I wonder when roller skates were invented.
Well, maybe it was this time. This is the era. Well, the hot ticket. But it all comes in the last act, in which there's a chase, which, for one of the reasons why I love Ealing movies is it presents this old London.
Yeah.
And it's just before all the commercialisation, and it's such a nostalgic, wonderful vision of London. And despite the rest of the film not being totally miserable, but it has like a very miserablest edge, it still has that. This is Ealing London,
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because not only is it a very old London, a very, as you say, pre-gentrification London, but it's also a very multicultural London. Maybe not in the way that it is now, but it's a very Jewish London. There's a sense that a lot of the people that we're seeing around the edges of this story are people who have come from Eastern Europe, who have fled the Nazis, So that's a really interesting time capsule.
Yeah, and the sequence in the train yard.
Wonderful.
It's hard to shoot something in that sort of space and make it coherent, but they did it.
Yeah.
I think one of the lines is, "We did a training exercise here, and you couldn't have found a rat." No, something
like that. Yeah,
it's really hard to find anything, And to frame something with all that chaos and all the trains going around, and have this sequence where someone's trying to escape and the police are trying to find them, to be coherent and well put together and tense, it's a great end sequence.
British cinema seemed to have a fair line in prison break movies once upon a time. I mean, the first... Well, not the first, but one of the really big British films, The Silent Era, was Asquith's A Cottage on Dartmoor, which is also about a prison break. And I don't know, I did wonder if that was maybe like a conscious homage, if there was more of a sense of the country having a cinema history. Because I think nowadays, when we think about British cinema history, we sort of think about, well, the Bond movies and the ones that won Oscars. And it's basically driven by which British films did the Americans like But there seems to be more of a sense of British cinema as an evolving thing, as a conversation in the Ealing films.
Yeah. No more about diverse than they were ever given credit for.
I think it's telling that you've said a few times, I don't know if this travels internationally, and truthfully, I don't know if Ealing travels internationally because it was made for a domestic audience, and watching it now you realise how rare it is to see a film that feels like it's talking to a British audience about Britain.
Yeah, for example, just culturally speaking, we'll talk about Kind Hearts and Coronets in a bit, and that's very upper class. And Old Brains on Sunday is very, very working class. And it sort of recycles things that you've heard your parents say or your grandparents say that they used to have to do when they were growing up.
Yeah.
And obviously these things are done internationally as well, because we don't have like a monopoly on certain things by any stretch. But it's just a weird little time capsule, I think, is again why it really works for me. Ealing is a general thing.
Yeah, time capsule is a good description of it, because I think it is one thing to have, as you say, your grandparents say, oh, when we were growing up, it was 7 to a bed, we had to stack each other on top of each other and all that. And then to actually watch a film in which a group of sympathetic characters are, in fact, all crammed into the same bed because there are not enough bedrooms in the house for all of them, it did suddenly give me a sense of, oh, this was real. This happened.
Yeah, because it's kind of sugar-coated for a lot of films, isn't it?
I think once you get past a certain era in modern British cinema, it's all aristocrats. Like, once you get before the 1950s, apparently the only people who lived in Britain before the 1950s were aristocrats. So it's nice to have this as a kind of counterweight to that.
Yeah, and it was why the kitchen sink was such a revelation, wasn't it? Because it presented a different version of England, but at the same time, very few presented it in terms of when black and white, in the sense of miserable or not, or dead, basically. There's some sort of texture to it, and this is, out of the kitchen sink dramas that I've seen, it's probably one of the better ones, I'd say.
It's one of the better British ones. I relate a lot to like realist films made outside this country, and I guess that's partly because I'm not comparing them to my own life and seeing how realistic they are. I don't, it doesn't hit me in that way. But yeah, I think maybe what sparked me rewatching it was watching Small Axe and thinking, well, that's a really beautiful, positive portrayal of British working class life. Why aren't they all like that? And watching this made me think that actually maybe once upon a time they were.
Yeah, which is a pleasant surprise, really. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would.
Yeah.
For 10 centuries it has waited to be awakened, to be worshipped again like a god, to fill the skies, to cast its shadow over the earth, to release its fury. Today in New York City, the Winged Serpent rises. The Winged Serpent rules. The Winged Serpent. David Carradine.
This thing has been prayed back into existence.
Michael Moriarty.
It was big, and there was something in it that looked like an egg. But it couldn't have been an egg. I mean, there aren't any eggs. There's no egg that big.
Richard Roundtree.
What I want to know is, how the hell does this tie in with the murders and the mutilations?
Candy Clark.
What are you going to do if someone dies tomorrow, or the next day, or the next day?
Well, I'm not going to think about it. It won't be my fault. It'll be theirs if they don't give me what I want.
Money. $1 million in cash, tax-free.
They are searching.
Looking good!
Discovering. Believing. And preparing for the battle of 1,000 years.
Load tracer ammunition. Want to see the trajectory?
Get those guys in the basket!
Okay, everybody hold their positions. Everybody stay right where you are, all right? Don't move.
Hello, I'm just dropping in here in the middle of the episode to set up what is coming in the near future. First things first, I've rejigged the release order I previously mentioned in the trailer for the series, the very first pre-episode, that the release schedule will be one episode on the 10th, an episode on the 20th, which is this, and an episode on the 30th, which is an exclusive on Patreon. So instead of that format where it's every 10 days, it's going to be rejigged slightly. So instead, starting from this episode today, it's going to be an episode every fortnight, every 2 weeks. That isn't including the Patreon episode. That is going to still be released on the last day-ish of every month to keep things clean. Keep things confusion-free. The upcoming episodes from this, the next one on Patreon, as we mentioned in the previous episode, will be for Larry Cohen, which will feature me, Cliff and Graham. And I'm not going to spoil who the next episode is going to be, but I will spoil the next 3B episode from the archive, the one that's repurposed from the archive. That is going to be John Waters, with me and John Waters aficionado Graham, so look forward to that. But if you do like the show, I've got to do the podcast bread and butter now. So if you enjoy the show up to this point, please do share us with your friends on the social media. It gets more eyes and ears on the show. Or if you want to do something a little bit more traditional, you can give us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or whatever it goes by now. And if you listen on Spotify, that is a new function that they have added to their platform, the ability to rate and review podcasts. So if you listen on either of those forms, please do get in touch. And even though I mentioned it at the end of the show, I'm going to mention it here again. And if there's anything that you'd like to add to any of the conversations that we've had, whether it's on Toshiaki Toyoda, or this episode with Robert Hamer, or the upcoming one with Larry Cohen, or next month's one that I can give away on John Waters. If there's anybody there who you have a comment on, or you'd like to add your 2 cents to the conversation on, I would love to hear from you. And you can email me at directorsuncutpod@gmail.com. That is directorsuncutpod@gmail.com. So without any more interruption, I think it's best to just jump back into the second half of this conversation, where me and Graham talk about Robert Hamer's legend, essentially, with Kind Hearts and Coronets.
As to the other undertaking, I had not forgotten or forgiven the boredom of the sermon at young Henry's funeral, and I decided to promote the Reverend Lord Henry Gascoigne to next place on the list. I therefore assumed the garb and character of a colonial bishop, spending his vacation making a collection of brass rubbings from country churches.
Good evening, my lord.
It was for a moment a shock to be addressed by my ecclesiastical title, but I recovered quickly.
Good evening. I was just taking a rubbing of this most interesting brass. An ancestress of my dear late wife. Allow me to introduce myself. Henry Gascoigne, rector of this parish.
Septimus Wilkinson, Bishop of Matabeleland. I'm spending my vacation taking a cycling tour around your beautiful country churches.
Ah, have you noticed our clerestory?
Ah, exquisite.
The corbels are very fine. Perhaps your lordship would permit me to show you one or two other things in which we take a pride.
I should be most interested.
So, that leads us to the main feature, which is Robert Hamer's probably it's no shadow of doubt about this actually, his most famous movie, one of the most famous British movies of the 40s, one of the most famous Ealing movies, Kind Hearts and Coronets.
Yes.
Which is a trip, really.
Kind Hearts and Coronets came out in that really miraculous year for Ealing when they did this, Passport to Pimlico and Whiskey Galore, and they'd been chugging away for a long time, but that really cemented the idea not just of Ealing, but of the Ealing comedy as a specific subgenre in British cinema. And this is a wild way to kick it off.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know the plot, it's basically a woman is part of the Gascoigne family, but she marries for love, not for status. And when she dies, she's refused entry into the family plot. And her son, name of actors. I can never remember name of actors.
Dennis Price.
There we go. Dennis Price. Well, he's damaged, we'll say. So he takes it upon himself to basically thin out the Gascoigne herd and become a duke, basically. Yeah. And famously, all of the Gascoigne herd is played by Alec Guinness.
Yeah, and it's absolutely incredible. I mean, not just in a technical sense, although there is one scene where they're all at a funeral and it's just row after row of Alec Guinnesses, and you think, how did they do that in 1949? But there's an acting achievement too.
My word. It had... The ones that really impressed me are the older one. I think it was the priest, the doddering priest.
Yes.
Which... It's hard to act older without, being a cartoon, but oh my word, he disappears. He vanishes completely playing that doddering old idiot priest.
And it's a character too, because, nowadays, of course, we know what Alec Guinness looked like when he was an old man. He looked like Obi-Wan Kenobi. But this is a completely different version of an ageing Alec Guinness. It is a real, every movement he makes is thought through.
And that's just one.
That's just one.
He plays a woman who's basically positioned as one of the figurehead of the suffragette movement.
That's my favourite, yeah, Agatha.
A younger man who's obsessed with photography and drinks on the sly. The one which he doesn't kill, who's the owner of a bank, who's, again, another older role, but it's just such an innocuous performance.
Mm.
There's the Grand Master of the family, the current Duke. Who else is there? I think there's another two. There's a general who's got a couple of scenes. And
there's a couple of young nephews. There are also very brief flashbacks to the current Duke's father, who is, again, also Alec Guinness.
Yes.
Bloody hell, man.
It doesn't establish that this should be a thing. This movie could have been filled by, 8 or 9 actors from whoever. Yeah. But I don't know how this happened. I know Alec Guinness was kind of he basically was the shoulders from which Ealing was built, because he was the centrepiece of a lot of their stuff.
Yeah.
But I just can't understand why he said, I'll do all them.
Well, apparently the original idea was that he would play 4 characters who I assume would be Ethelred's 4 younger brothers. That would be the most logical way to do it. But he read the script and he said, well, this is fantastic. I want to play all of them.
Well, fair play to him. He does it fantastically. And it's not a movie based on him either. He is not the lead role in any way, shape or form.
Yeah. I think that's part of the delight of it, because it's almost musical. You have Dennis Price as the drum beat that goes throughout the whole song, and then Alec Guinness comes along and plays a series of different solos. It's such a wonderful structure to have.
And it's the very opposite of, like I mentioned earlier, it's the very opposite of It Always Rains on Sundays, and it's very upper class, and its script is devilishly clever.
Yes.
And it's all positioned as sort of, I can't remember the name of his character now. Mazzini, is it?
Oh, Lewis Mazzini, yes.
Who's sort of writing his memoirs in prison. So it explains away the very verbose way of expressing everything. So you have, for more modern viewers, they probably have to pay attention a little bit more, but at the same time, it's just this incredible script where most of the time it's not funny, and then there'll be one-liner where you're just creasing.
Yeah, it's just one shot. Sly. Yeah, there is that amazing shot in the Agatha sequence of Dennis Price marching on a suffragette's right to vote march, and just the expression on his face as he doggedly marches in this very important historical cause, clearly thinking, if I just keep at this for a bit longer, I can murder the old woman. It's just It's incredible.
There's like one line which really got me. Is talking about a love interest who sort of lingers around. It's a really weird name, like Sedale or something. It's
Sibella, the Joan Greenwood character. Yeah,
Sibella. Yeah, where he talks about her husband. Says he's got a miraculous predilection for middle age for a man of 24. And it's just the horrible, mean-spirited way, but he does it in such a classy, sort of dry and commanding way that it's hilarious.
Yeah, and this had a screenplay that it has kind of an interesting genesis. Hammer co-wrote it with John Dighton, but it was also polished up by Nancy Mitford, one of the preeminent novelists of her era, which is, I guess, one of the things that Britain lacks, because we lack a studio system. That when you have studios like Ealing, like Hammer, like all of those great British institutions of time gone by, it is more common to bring people in to take a look at a script and do it up rather than having everything be an independent production.
The murders as well, it's probably the darkest film that Ealing did.
The bit where he is briefly worried that he's gone further back in the line of succession because of the birth of twin babies, and then he finds a solution to that.
It's horrible. Yes. And it's played for laughs as well,
It is such a strange project in such a lot of ways, and I think part of what makes it work is that Mazzini isn't driven by any kind of murderous rage. He's driven by just petty social climbing concerns. He's developed this extremely, unbelievably extreme solution to something that for most people is just a cause of, like, simmering discontent.
I think that comes across in the murder sequences too. In particular, the first one, which kind of just showed you how glib a character he is, where he's waiting in a high society coffee shop, basically a country club, whatever you want to call it, for days on end. It's depicted as, and then he just goes along with a boat, unties the other person's boat, and just nudges it.
Yes, yeah.
He doesn't really think much of it, he just nudges it off the end.
It's like a very, very casual version of the death of Dickie Greenleaf in The Talented Mr. Ripley.
It's almost like he's not murdering people, he's just sort of... It's just so glib. The way he does the drinking cousin as well.
Yes.
Where there's just an explosion and he doesn't care.
I think he is such a monstrous character, but you can see parts of people in him. His absolute horror of being considered suburban, the way that he uses suburban as if it's the worst word in the world, is something that's very connectable to everyday life, I think.
And it's a fun watch, really, despite it being so horrible and horrifically dark. And it takes such a glib perspective on offing people who, are your own family. It's also very funny and incredibly entertaining, because it just sends up high society in a way which I don't think any of the movies which look at the higher societies, our betters in British society, really had the nerve to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to imagine it being made even now, and I can't really see that happening.
No, it's kind of weird to say so with a film which has such a reputation as sort of an elder statesman in British cinema, but it's kind of dangerous. It's a dangerous movie.
Yeah, I mean, British cinema, we mentioned this when we were talking about It Always Rains on Sunday, but it is very deferential towards the upper classes right now. And the further you get back into history, the more deferential it becomes. And this is odd, because for all every Ealing film just feels like part of the Ealing era now, this is a period film. It is set about sort of 40, 50 years before it was made. And Sir Michael Balcon, the guy who ran Ealing Studios, was very against period dramas. He always said that he wanted to run a film studio to tell stories that meant something to Britain now, as it is today. So I don't know whether maybe part of that period setting was to kind of defang it a bit, to say, okay, it's okay, we're not saying this should happen to the British aristocracy now, we're just saying back then they were bad. But it doesn't entirely get rid of the aftertaste, I think.
It also it has quite a mean spirit in a lot of ways, but I think the meanest of the mean is in the last 20 minutes. With the final twist is a hell of a stonker of a twist, but what was the name of the love interest again? It's such a weird name. It doesn't.
Sibella,
yeah. When she presents this opportunity to get out, it's just deliciously evil.
Yes.
It's one of those moments where, is she recommending? Oh, she is. I'm not going to explain it in plain terms because not everybody's seen it, but it's just a character who's basically presented as this ditzy, lovable girl next door is probably even more evil than the main character.
Yes, yeah, it's great. Also, a nice cameo in there. The journalist who approaches Mazzini for his memoirs is Arthur Lowe, who would go on to play Captain Mannering in Dad's Army.
Was it?
Yeah.
That completely skipped me by that.
I mean, it was very early in his career. He looks very different, but yeah, same guy.
Oh, wow. Because that final shot is probably one of the best final shots in British cinema. Just for that,
And it's one of those things. It sort of reminds me of the endings of those classic like Hollywood film noirs that were being made at the same time, where on one level, those films end like they do because the Hayes office was in power and they said that, you cannot portray criminals getting away with it. So they are kind of moral judgments. But on the other end, they're so bleak. They actually make the films feel more pessimistic and corrupt because of how dark the endings are. And I think Kind Hearts and Coronets has a similar thing, that on one level, Mazzini doesn't get away with what he's doing, but in a strange way, it feels even more cruel because it's not the wheels of justice turning. It's just a dumb accident.
Yeah, he's basically his house of cards tumbles because of his own arrogance, really.
Yeah,
which is a fun sort of comeuppance for him. Horrible, but fun.
While we're talking about the prison scenes, I have to mention Miles Mallison as the Hangman, who I think is brilliant. The thing with the Hangman is that he has such a macabre sensibility that you think he's barely any more socially adept than Mazzini. You do kind of wonder if Mazzini had just exercised his passion for murdering people by becoming a state executioner. He could have avoided a lot of trouble and he'd have fit right in.
Yes, he would. It's going to be a hard recommend for a lot of people, I think, though.
I think, yeah, more so even than the darkness of it. I can imagine some people just finding the whole air of it weird and archaic.
It's a language thing as well.
Yeah.
It's not so much Old English. Well, I had a position in going back. I worked at a local archive reference library and the first ever local newspaper of the area, and the language it was written in was very flowery, very over embellished and over explained, and using words which you don't know that you have to look up, and it's all spoken in that sort of Queen's English dialect, but it's a story about pettiness, about revenge and double timing, and it's if this was presented another way, it'd basically be a very sleazy movie.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits of watching it on the back of It Always Rains on Sunday, because you realise that the language in Kind Hearts and Coronets isn't just there because, it was the times, everyone talked like that. No, they absolutely didn't. And Robert Hamer was perfectly capable of writing demotic, naturalistic, working-class dialogue. it is a deliberate choice to counterbalance how vicious and sleazy the storyline is. It is deliberate irony.
Which, yeah, it's one of a kind, really, from a studio, which the idea of Ealing comedy is very dark and it's very funny. That's what history's kind of boiled it down into, but the difference in styles that was overlooking. Lady Killers is so much different to Kind Hearts and Coronets, which is so much different to It Always Rains on Sunday, which is always different to, I can never remember the name of it.
The Lavender Hill Mob or something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking of the one where... I was thinking of the one where it's World War II when the Germans attack a village.
Went the Day Well. That's an amazing movie, yeah.
These do not feel like the same studio and the same output. To boil it all down to dark funniness, it's overlooking a lot of the weirder edges that these films are sort of putting together, really.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. I think there is... For all it's very easy to remember Ealing as something quite cosy because, let's face it, everyone loves it. There is a real danger of an artistic risk-taking as well as risk-taking of taste in their work that comes through very clearly here.
And I'm glad. It was one of these movies, I'll be honest, it was on my list of shame. It's probably one of the biggest things on my list of shame because it's kind of an institution, this movie.
Yeah.
It's the sort of movie where I can very easily see it being a tentpole of a theatre run. It's got like a very popular stage show. It has that sort of essence about it.
Yeah.
But for it to be so sleazy, so dangerous, so subversive.
I mean, the problem with putting it on stage would be that whoever's playing the Gascoigne family would have to do some pretty quick work in the wings.
Yes, there would. But I'm so glad I've ticked it off my list of shame. I really am. It was a delight to discover.
Excellent.
Good afternoon, Sergeant Howie. I trust the sight of the young people refreshes you.
No, sir. It does not refresh me.
Oh, I'm sorry. One should always be open to the regenerative influences. I understand you're looking for a missing girl.
I found her.
Splendid.
In her grave. Your Lordship, as a Justice of the Peace, I need your permission to exhume her body, have it transported to the mainland for a pathologist's report.
You suspect foul play?
I suspect murder and conspiracy to murder.
In that case, you must go ahead.
Your Lordship seems strangely unconcerned.
I'm confident your suspicions are wrong, Sergeant. We don't commit murder up here. We're a deeply religious people.
Religious? With ruined churches? No ministers, no priests, and children dancing naked.
This upcoming bit where we talk about movies, where what we've been watching, is a excerpt from the upcoming Patreon episode with myself, Graham, and Cliff. It's not like for like. The first section is the same, but the difference between what's going here on the free feed and what will be going on the Patreon feed is the Patreon one will be that little bit longer. So I'll just jump straight into it. Awkward, untransitionless segue. So here we go. Okay, so to wrap up, part of the show we usually do is just stuff we've been watching outside of the show, stuff we'd like to draw attention to. Anyone want to jump in first?
I've got a new release that you might want to discuss.
Okay.
So it is Philip Barantini's Boiling Point.
Oh.
Which is the single shot thriller drama set in a restaurant and specifically the kitchen, starring Stephen Graham, who is as brilliantly Stephen Graham as ever. The rest of the cast really great too. It's one thing that bugged me a bit was that because it's a single shot thing, it's all meant to be in real time, and a night in a restaurant does not only take 90 minutes. So it took me out of the film a bit when people were getting their main courses, 10 minutes after ordering, or things like that, or the way that the wines were served was just appalling. But it's good. It's good. It's just it's one of those stressy dramas, but it didn't feel quite stressy enough. Not quite in. I suppose Uncut Gems is what it was aiming for. My comparison, I prefer to be the EastEnders episode where Ian Beale was running around trying to get enough money to save his businesses. It's not as good as that.
I think I'm going to get a few perplexed looks here, but one of the things I want to do in 2022 is just fill in the blanks of my horror card. The list of shame. And the first one that I've chose on that list, it's The Wicker Man. I've watched The Wicker Man for the first time.
So good. It's in my all-time top 10.
I'm not sure what I think. I mean, I watched it last night and I'm still not quite sure what I think about it. It's calling it a horror. I'm not sure it really is. I mean, the last act, absolutely. I mean, that's the reason why I've not watched it for so long, because when I know exactly how it ends, where's the tension? Some films are like that. I mean, they're so geared around that big twist ending that if you know what it is, it's just pointless watching them.
No, because it's so sad that I don't think the sadness ever leaves you.
That was on the poster from the start.
Yeah.
That thing was always the poster for The Wicker Man, which is bizarre.
I mean, it's really, really interesting, I think, when you look at it as sort of a religious horror, as in the bad guy is the Christian. Because that's the way the movie unfolds, and it just such a unique proposition. And in the 70s, we were a much more Christian country, the UK, then than we are now. And the nuts on Robin Hardy and the scriptwriters to come up with this, even calling it horror, again, going back to that point, I'm not sure it really is, because it's effectively a folk musical with a horrifically bleak ending.
But, so you're saying that you reckon Howie is the bad guy?
The way it plays now, yeah.
I don't think... Okay, so he does some out of order things, definitely. His lines of questioning, his trying to convert everyone to Christianity, all that is not what you would want of a member of public service. But he's definitely the hero, and there are no villains in it, I don't think. I don't think anyone is the villain, because everyone is doing what they believe in, and it's just terribly sad the way it ends. And that's why, even though when you know what's coming, the way it's written and the way it's performed, especially by Edward Woodward, it's just tragic. It's so, it's just heartbreaking. But also the music is brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, one thing you don't expect is a scene where he spunks his pants because of
they're not subtle about that, really, are they? I mean, it's one of these movies.
It's so good.
I really liked it, but I think, to really crystallise my thoughts, I think it's one of these movies that adds a little bit extra every time you watch it.
I would say so. Yeah.
So I really liked it, but I think come back in about a year or two, and I'll really be able to say what I think of it. I think.
Yeah, perhaps it's even better when you know where it is leading, because the whole investigation you take at face value the first time you watch it, and then when you know that Rowan has never actually been missing, she's just hidden, then it's just all the more tragic.
And you mentioned the songs. The songs are also filthy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kids singing about, the phallus. And it's quite something.
It's so good.
So, Graham, what have you been watching?
Well, as well as the stuff that I seek out on my own, I like to occasionally shine a spotlight on some of the things that I've recently reviewed on the Geek Show site. And I got my 2022 off to an interesting start with Criterion's new Blu-ray of The Realm of the Senses, which... I was going to say it's quite a film whatever way you slice it, but it might be too soon for me to use the word slice. With
It's always too soon for that one, Graham.
I think it's great. I mean, one of the things that really struck me on this watch is that, because I'd seen it before, and the first time you see it, you just sat there thinking, Jesus. And that's it. That's the review. But the second time you realise how every single response that Oshima gets is one that he is priming you for. When he wants you to be shocked, you are shocked. When I'm sure there are people who've done that classic liberal newspaper columnist thing of going, actually, this film with a load of sex struck me as quite boring, and expecting everyone to give you a round of applause for that.
Well, that's kind of become like the people say, I actually think Quentin Tarantino's best movie is Jackie Brown.
It's Jackie Brown, yes. Hold on to your hats, everyone.
Yeah. It's the most boring one. Well, no, actually, it's not, is it?
Death Proof is still there. It's
Death Proof
close.
is the worst, and Hateful Eight isn't great. But
I think there is a point in the realm of the senses where you are absolutely meant to feel slightly numb and sick of this, and that is absolutely the point. It's notable that when Sada and her partner start having sex in public, it's like that's at a very controlled point of the film, so that when people start looking at them and going, oh, young love, you've seen enough of this that you're going, no, actually, don't you see that this is slightly mad, that they literally do nothing all the time except have sex? Don't you think that's like maybe they should go for a walk instead? It's at exactly that point in the film, and I think it is a film that is just so in charge of its own effect on the viewer and its own pacing and the way that it introduces its ideas that I cannot hesitate to call it a masterpiece. I think it's so great.
So for Devil Times 5 this month, we're watching a load of shark films. I watched a film a couple of days ago called Jaws in Japan, aka Psycho Shark, which so it's got absolutely just a raft of half-star reviews on Letterboxd. This is hated, this film, and I was fully expecting one of those Asylum type, just knowingly stupid bullshit load of shit.
Yes,
fucking hell, it's so weird. It's it's boring in places. It's repetitive, like literally seeing the same bits of found footage over and over again. But it's kind of an art horror film. It's not what I was expecting at all. And it's really weird how little, for a film called Jaws in Japan, how little it's interested in building up the threat of any potential shark attacks. I mean, most of it takes place in a hotel room or safely on the beach.
That is like true of a lot of Asylum movies. They have the same one, like hotel room for all of these purposes.
Sure,
yes,
but that's not what this is. This is art. This is, and it's misunderstood, and it's a very strange film. And there is a shark in it, so I didn't feel shortchanged. You pretty much have to wait till the final few seconds for it to appear, and when it appears, oh my fucking. It's bloody hell. It's ridiculous. But it's not. It's just not a shark film, and that's why people hate it. It's just so weird, and it was one of those films that so doesn't play by the rules that it's unsettling, because it's just not doing anything narratively normal, and I didn't know where it was going. I couldn't see how a shark could possibly get involved in this thing. I didn't know why. The one that you keep getting these kind of flashbacks to a naked woman all bloody in a shower, like she's being attacked by people. What's that got to do with sharks? It's mad. But then like it was just left. As soon as it finished, I thought, wow, I really enjoyed that in a weird way. So, yeah. But I'll be talking about that on Devil Times 5 and seeing if my fellow devils are of the, of the leaning that it should have had more sharks in it. Or some sharks in it.
I don't know how to segue out of that one now. Continuing from the frame that Graham set up with like new releases, I've watched Mario Bava's last movie, Shock.
I like Shock.
I'm not sure what I think of it, honestly. Because it's sort of caught. It's at the point in his career where he effectively had to have help finished by his son Lamberto Bava. And it's so very, very different than what you'd think of as a Mario Bava movie, because it plays much more modern than his sort of classical style really allows for. He's much more gothic and grand. And this is effectively all set in one house, or Names. Here we go. I've got to get names. She's an elder statesman.
Daria Nicolodi.
Daria Nicolodi, yeah, she's an elder statesman of Jello. I think most famous, Deep Red, if I remember correctly.
And Tenebrae.
Yeah, she's great. She's a great lead. But effectively, it's a movie about her kid being a little shite, who's either possessed by the malcontent of the house or her dead husband's spirit. It's Italian horror. Don't ask questions. And it's really weird, you know. I mean, not in a way that you'd expect for an Italian horror, because it's quite pedestrian in the wildness that it gets up to. There's a bit where there's floating hands, there's dream sequences that appear to be real, there's voodoo via a little picture and a swing, which I'm not sure what that's supposed to be.
Right.
It's one of these, we'll just make it up as we go along. It's Italian horror through and through, isn't it? Don't question it. It just happens, all right?
Freeform, I think, is the polite way of saying this.
But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I don't think it's one of Bava's best movies, but I think it shows what a chameleon he was, that he could sort of do whatever, really. And my word, his filmography is full of him just doing whatever, really.
I like the bit where there's a floating Stanley knife that makes a noise like a lightsaber.
It does. Yeah. And Daria Nicolodi, bloody hell, she can scream.
It's got a great jump scare in it as well that got totally ripped off in Annabelle.
Is this the one where the kid transforms into the adult?
Yep.
Yeah, that's a weird scene. A really weird scene. But yeah, Shock's worth a hunt for completists. And, you know, just fans of Italian horror, I think. It's got a lot to offer. Although I will say this, Lamberto Bava, nah. I'll just go on record and say that. He did not inherit his dad's talent.
That's not strictly Mario Bava's final film, because he made Rabid Dogs, but that was unfinished, pretty much. Kind of unfinished. It has been finished, and it's brilliant. And it might even be my favourite Mario Bava film.
I never attempted to
contentious.
It's the Poliziochetti. That's his attempt at that, isn't it? Is that
Poliziotteschi, yeah.
Yeah, it's all the Z's.
It's not really, because it's not about police. It's about gang of crims.
Yeah, but it's worth a Lamberto Bava, not as cool as his dad. Grim. Segue out of that.
Don't knock demons.
I watched something by someone who I don't know who their dad is, so I can't really judge it on those criteria, but I watched Mark Allegret's 1934 film Juju, a vehicle for the immortal Josephine Baker, the American star who found fame dancing in Paris. And it's probably her best film, her best feature film vehicle at least, which isn't necessarily saying much. Film's always had a bit of trouble capturing Josephine Baker without clunky melodramatic plots and hideous racial stereotyping getting in the way. This is definitely lighter on the hideous racial stereotyping, and Baker said she actually thought her title role was a very good one. Clunky melodramatic plots. Can't say it's entirely innocent of that. She plays a circus performer whose brother is white, played by Jean Gabin. They're exhibited at first as like this human curiosity, which is the polite way of saying at a freak show, as these mixed-race twins, and gradually it is detected that Juju has this remarkable singing and dancing talent that we all know Josephine Baker had, and it takes a remarkably long time to get to that point. But it does mean that having absolutely twiddled its thumbs for hours setting it up, the back end of the film is just like knockout musical number after knockout musical number. I still think the most undiluted way to appreciate Baker's genius is to watch some of the shorts she appeared in, like The Fireman of the Folies Berger, where she's just brought on to do a dance number, and it's amazing. But as fully fledged Baker vehicles go, Juju is pretty good, and it's got Jean Gabin in it, and Gabin's always good value, so could do worse.
Yeah, I'm going to admit here, when I'm defeated and I have no idea what any of that is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, just pass me by that one.
Well done segueing from Mario Bava to that, though. That's us for another episode. Thanks for sticking with us to the end. If you have any questions or any comments on the films we've covered recently, or their makers, we'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at _RJ Simpson. That's _RJ Simpson. Or email us at directorsuncutpod, directorsuncutpod@gmail.com. So the next episode that we'll be dropping for Directors Uncut will be on the Patreon. There's a link in the description, and that's going to be about Larry Cohen. But if you stay tuned to the social media, you will find out who is in the upcoming episode come February. Yes, but that's it for now. I'm signing out for myself and for Graham, who you can find elsewhere on the internet at Horrified magazine and in his very own Pop Screen podcast. But until the next episode, whether you hear us on Patreon or whether you hear us here on the free podcast feed, thanks for listening.